What's up, everyone? It's Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I'm back today with another client interview for you guys. Really excited to have Selin on with us today to talk about the summer 2022 recruiting process that she just finished going through and ended up having a really, really great outcome. Super excited for her. But I'll let her tell you about herself. And so, Selin, thank you so much for being on here with us today and for taking the time.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. And so to get started, if you can just maybe introduce yourself to our listeners a little bit and give them a sense of kind of like, what type of profile you are and, like where do you go to school and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I go to UC Berkeley right now. I'm majoring in economics and applied math. I'm technically a rising senior, but I did take my last spring semester off just due to COVID. So I'll be graduating in December 2022. So I effectively got an extra summer essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I first came into Berkeley, I had zero plans of going into finance at all. I did a lot of research in neuroscience back in high school. I knew that I didn't want to necessarily continue down the research path. I was more interested in health tech startups, wanted something that was more fast paced and interesting. But I think in Berkeley though, took, an introductory business class, loved it, kind of fell in love with the whole, just really loved finance, honestly, and really just sort of made a pivot there. But I think personally, just my freshman and sophomore years, there were a lot of options out there that I was considering. And I wouldn't say that I was necessarily focused in on one particular thing. I was just personally exploring a lot of different paths that were out there for me.
Yeah.
And I did eventually intern at a health tech startup. I realized that wasn't for me either. And so, yeah, kind of just eventually got a bit more exposure to the idea of going into banking, just from hearing some other friends talk about it, but had absolutely no idea how to actually go about recruiting.
Got it. No, that's great. So I guess, that's pretty common. I feel like most people don't know what banking is going into college, right? And then depending on the school you go to, at some point you probably hear about it because there's always someone that wants to do it. At what point in your college career did you realize that, hey, maybe banking is what I actually want to do?
I would say I kind of started to look into it a little bit more in my second semester, sophomore year. But at the time, I wasn't fully committed to it. Also, I think just seeing everyone talk about it online, it seemed like ridiculously competitive. And I think personally, I just did not know where to get started. And I felt like my GPA wasn't good enough. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And, when you hear things like, okay, yeah, Goldman has an acceptance rate of 1%. It's a little intimidating to hear that.
Yeah.
And so, I just kind of hear more about like anecdotes from friends and their kind of experience, just their process of going through it. And that was when the whole idea of going into it seemed a bit more interesting.
And look where you are now.
Yeah. Yep. At Goldman. Yep.
That's kind of ironic and funny at the same time. But so, okay, second semester, sophomore year, you start kind of like looking into it. You're a bit intimidated. It's also probably a little bit late in the process, right? Because nowadays with junior summer internship recruiting, like by the time you start looking into it, probably some of your classmates were already going through that process and you were just starting out, right?
Yeah.
So then, like, what happened from there? Because I believe you joined Wall Street Mastermind like September of last year. So that was like at the beginning of your junior year,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. So
what, like, had you tried anything up to that point on your own? Like, did you apply to some places? Did you get any interviews or were you studying? Like, what were you doing?
yeah. So I at the time I was in an investing club at Berkeley. And so I just had some of the other people there kind of look over my resume, kind of give me some tips on preparing for things like behavioral interviews. And I'd applied to just a few different firms. They were more out, not necessarily banking, but in other areas like Point 72, for example. But at least just personally, I ended up getting dinged from all of them. And so I think that for me was it just kind of made the process seem even more intimidating at that point. And then, just from kind of like talking to people, at least in my investing club, something I kind of also realized too was just that, hearing everyone kind of talk about their experiences, it was helpful, but also at the same time, it was very much a little bit all over the place, just
Mm.
because everyone had kind of gathered a lot of information just for all these different resources online, but there wasn't necessarily any like cohesive structure.
Yeah.
And for me, that was something else that I just kind of really struggled with. And so, after I did my internship at that the health tech startup, that was when, I kind of realized like, okay, you really need to sort of just laser in on some path. And that was when I came across Wall Street Mastermind, and yeah, just really took it from there.
Got it. Okay. So you did the health tech internship sophomore summer.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, you still weren't really doing finance stuff yet. But then at the end of
Mm-hmm.
that summer, you're like, I don't think this is the direction I want to go down. Okay, now it's time to really get serious about banking. And then so you kind of connected with us and kind of hopped into the program. So
Mm-hmm.
what like what were your what were your expectations coming in, or
Mm-hmm.
like were you skeptical at all initially when you heard about it? It was like, maybe this sounds too good to be true, or does this actually work, or like what was your mindset at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
what ultimately caused you to decide to join?
Yeah, so I think because I've been looking a little bit into banking online, it's funny because I end up getting a lot of ads for the program on Instagram. Just however, I guess the algorithm works, but I'd see ads for the program pretty often, and I think just after getting rejected from a lot of different places, even after kind of having my friends review my resume and stuff for me, and not even getting like first round interviews, I think that was when I was sort of just motivated, like, okay, it's time to it's time to consider other options, because it seems like just trying to do things on my own isn't getting me the results that I want.
Mm,
So from there, clicked on the program. I was to a certain extent a little bit skeptical, but at the same time, I think just sort of seeing like all the different client interviews and testimonials from people, that really kind of backs the program up and adds definitely a lot of, just for me, it added a lot more credibility to the program. And hearing people talk about these crazy internships that they were getting, the things like the offers that I really wanted for myself, I think that was just insanely motivating. Even the person I spoke with on the informational call, she mentioned that she had gotten an offer at PJT, and she asked me, like how well I knew my technicals. And at the time I said, I know maybe a little bit, not a lot. And then she kind of gave an example question, her answer. And at that point I was like, okay, wow, it seems like, you know, through this program, you get just a lot of training. And
yeah.
I knew also that I needed something that, because it was my, September junior year, I knew I needed something that was just going to get me an offer like ASAP.
Yeah, got it. That was Jen that you spoke to?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. That makes sense. So then you come in junior year, and then what happened from there? Like once you're inside the program, like people always ask, like, so what do you actually do in the program, or like what's so different about that versus the resources you already had at school, the investment club you were already a part of, or the upperclassmen who were already helping you? Like, is there a difference, or why even join a program like this?
There's a huge difference. I would say it's it's kind of like having a personal trainer. Actually, that summer I started strength training, and I remember like when I first started, there was kind of this. I thought about, does it make sense for me to try it out on my own versus like hire a trainer? And just I kind of knew like it made a lot more sense to have a trainer, someone who knows what they're doing. You like someone who essentially is going to guide you through what you need to do, again in that structured way, will get you the results that you want to get without you trying to figure it out or trying to go to like X, Y, and Z different people to try and ask them for advice. And of course, yes, upperclassmen can be super helpful, but they're also just students, and they're also like just in their early 20s. It's not like they've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
And it's not like they've also worked with, other people in their own unique situations and backgrounds, and that they can, tailor their advice for your own specific situation.
Yeah.
And so I kind of knew that I needed something that was just going to be a lot more tailored to me, and something that was, again, just going to be a lot more structured.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good analogy. I haven't thought of that one, but um, I powerlifted for a while, and I had a trainer too. And there's no way I
Yeah.
could have learned the correct form and posture and programming and all of
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
by myself. Or I could, but I probably would get injured all the time. And then kind of getting advice from upperclassmen is kind of like going to the gym and asking for a quick tip from the guy who's doing his set next to you, and maybe he's a little bit buffer than you are, and you just like, it's not the same as having this professional who knows exactly what you need and can customize kind of a regimen for you, right?
Exactly.
The results that you get are much better, and you also get there much faster as well, right?
Oh, for sure. And that was actually that was a big pitch that I made to my parents as well. And I think just the other thing too is just consistency is something that's so important, especially with recruiting. And when you get rejected, it's insanely helpful to have someone there and just sort of again like that community of people and that structured program where you essentially like you don't fall off track. If you're doing it on your own, it's really easy to kind of just give up on banking at some point, or just to not necessarily stay on top of it. But if you have a coach, again, it makes it a lot easier.
Right. How was that conversation with their parents? Because, a lot of students that want to work with us, they have to go through that step of talking to their parents about the program. And a lot of times, like, it's not the easiest conversation to have, right? Or like they don't understand what investment banking recruiting is or how it works. They don't understand, like, why do you need a coach for this? Like, like, it's kind of a foreign concept to them, right? So was that like a difficult conversation, or are they like pretty supportive right off the bat?
I'd say my dad was supportive. My mom was definitely a lot more skeptical. My dad has more of a finance background. Did commercial banking at Chase a while back. He also worked at a hedge fund for a few years, and so he kind of, he knows a little bit more about just the whole finance industry. But he's also been retired for like the past 10 years.
Yeah.
But he was just a lot more. He was just a lot more supportive of it, and he knew that I'd been applying to other places, and I didn't have much success with that.
Yeah.
My mom, though, she's a doctor, doesn't have really any finance background. And for her, it was kind of like, well, why can't you just do this on your own? She's also like one of the biggest hustlers I know. And so for her, it's like, well, yeah, just doing it on your own should be easy, right?
Yeah.
But I think just the thing that I kind of stressed to her was just, again, the fact that time was running out basically for me to find an internship for my next summer.
Yeah.
And that was critical. It was just really critical that I found something. Otherwise, like, the money that they were paying for me to go to Berkeley was going to kind of go down the drain if I, walk away from college without a job, basically.
Yeah.
And I also just stressed the fact that I was really struggling out on my own and that I really needed someone to kind of guide me through the process.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, a tip for, I guess, everyone else is listening who's maybe thinking about having this conversation with their parents is like, you have to kind of speak your parents' language, right? Like, I mean, as a parent myself now, I just have my second kid. All parents want their children to do well, right? And it's like, why do your parents pay so much money for you to go to college? Why don't they just send you to community college and save tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars? Well, it's because they believe that if you go to UC Berkeley or whatever other school you go to, that you will have a much better future and much better career prospects, right? And so if they're willing to make that type of investment in your career already or in your education, this is kind of no different than that, right? Like, this is going towards the same thing. In fact, it's much less than what you're paying to go to college, obviously, but college is crazy nowadays. But like, it's kind of helping them understand that, hey, you already invested this much. How do we make sure we maximize the return on this investment that you've already made, right? Because I think everybody's aligned on that, right? Like, everyone wants to make sure that this six-figure investment does not go to waste, right? And so I think that's a great way that you framed it there. So I guess you were getting interviews before, you got dinged from all of them. You ended up not really getting the offers that you wanted. Then you came into this program. What kind of, like, what was that process like? Because obviously from September last year to now we're in July of this year, so it's like a 10 months journey, right? Like, it wasn't easy by any means. We're not saying, hey, if you're in Wall Street Mastermind, then this job's just gonna fall into your laps. Like, you had to still work your butt off and really earn it, right? So what was that process like? Can you just kind of like give people a sense for what had to go into it?
Yeah, so when I first joined my junior fall, at that point in the recruiting timeline, just the number of banks that was still recruiting at the time were definitely a lot. There were just a lot fewer banks that were recruiting at the time. I got in interviews with like HSBC and Cowen, but I kind of just got to a point. I mean, this was also it was kind of a unique year as well because this was during COVID, and I was back home taking online classes. And so, when I was in the program, just attending office hours, I hear like more and more people talking about how they were deciding to take, their semester off, and delay their graduation by a semester. And that was kind of something that I also started to think a lot more about as well. And that was also something that was super helpful too, just going to office hours and hearing, what other people were doing, just how other people were kind of thinking about things as well. And just again, hearing the feedback from the coach. And so I also started to think about just what it would look like if I took my spring semester off. Just in part, Berkeley is expensive, especially if you're taking online classes. It just didn't make any logistic sense for me.
Yeah.
But then there was also kind of the added benefit of being able to then recruit as a sophomore. And so I thought, well, I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to commit to this yet, but, I saw that other places, I was looking at sophomore programs, and I saw through the Slack channels that, DB still had their sophomore program that was open. So I applied to that, and there was, just the essay, cover letter, resume. I had all of that, proofread by one of your guys. They kind of gave me feedback, just a lot of tips on how to, just how to improve my application. And I eventually got the offer from DB for their sophomore program. And yeah, at that point it was like, all right, I'll take spring semester off. And yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, you mentioned a couple of things there, which I think probably people wouldn't expect if they haven't been to the program yet, which is one, a lot of people when they think coaching is just like, oh, I get one-on-one coaching from a banker or something, which obviously is really useful too, and being able to ask questions and have someone answer anytime, that's crucial, right? But the other aspect that I think is really unique about what we do is kind of the community aspect, where, like you said, going to office hours and not just being able to ask your own questions, but being able to hear the questions that other people are asking. And sometimes people might ask questions that you would have never thought to ask. And so, but once you hear the question, you're like, oh, actually, I want to know that too. And secondly, sometimes other people might be doing things or applying certain strategies to their own process, and you haven't thought about that strategy yet. And you're like, oh, maybe I can do that too. And so it's almost like you're not just doing this on your own, but there's the collective, whatever, brain power or experience, so to speak, which you can benefit from, right? And so I think that part is something that I really, really love about our program. But the other thing is, like you said, the Slack channel, which again, I guess this also ties back to the community, which is people are constantly in the Slack channels just talking to each other, sharing intel, sharing job and internship opportunities that just came up, or sharing interview questions. Like they just went through an interview and asking like, hey, what questions did this bank ask? And so on and so forth. And that just gives you so much more of an advantage that you wouldn't have had otherwise if you weren't kind of in that, like in the know, right? Like if you didn't know ahead of time what to expect, or if you didn't even know about the opportunity, like if you didn't even hear about this DB opportunity, then you would be probably doing something totally different this summer, right? And having an internship like DB on your resume for your sophomore summer is, I mean, that's probably one of the best internships you can have as a sophomore, I would say, right? I mean, there are very few sophomore bulge bracket internships, I would say, out there, right? So I think it's almost like, I mean, people join these clubs at school and whatnot. I think there's a lot of similarities between Wall Street Mastermind and some of those organizations in terms of just being a part of a community. But I think, I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously you're in some of these clubs at school too. But I think one thing that, and probably every club's different, but one thing that I really like about the people in our community is that it's not like this cutthroat environment. Like everybody is I mean, you guys are competing technically for jobs, but everyone kind of is still, I think, very collaborative and very helpful. And like I said, sharing information with each other, you would think that people wouldn't do that all that much because why would I help you? If you get a job, then that's one less job for me. But somehow the culture kind of just is the way it is. I'm not going to take credit
Yeah.
for it, but people are just very helpful to each other, which is amazing to see, right? And it's amazing to be a part of.
Oh no, that was honestly something that was just very shocking for me to see as well. Because, like, I mean, you can go on Wall Street Oasis and people will have threads, and sometimes you'll have some people who maybe comment like the interview questions that they got, but it's not that often. And if you ask them a question, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get a response back. You're just kind of like talking to a void. But I know, like on Wall Street Mastermind, like literally just anytime anyone asks a question, like they almost always get a response from someone, and everyone is just kind of like constantly there to help each other. I've seen people even post, like different job opportunities that a bank hasn't necessarily released yet that they got like through their own networking efforts. And then the person, like the banker they spoke with, gave them a special code, like a special job code to input on their website. And people will literally post like those opportunities for people to check out, which I think is just like, that to me is kind of insane. That people are, sharing like this much information. And also everyone is kind of just geared again towards, like investment banking and other kind of finance related roles. And so just having that, that level of focus is also really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen those. We've all seen those Wall Street Oasis threads where someone asks a question and then 10 other people want to know the answer. So they say bump, 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 bump. And then like no one's answering the question, right? But no, I mean, yeah, I love that about the group that we have here. And the network is only growing over time. And now even some of our alumni who are working in banking, like Daniel and some of the people that you see chiming in all the time, answering questions. I'm amazed sometimes how Daniel's answering everyone's technical questions, and I'm like, "Yo, aren't you like working at Citi? Like, don't you have like a deal to work on or something? Like, you're just in here coaching people for free on my behalf, which I totally appreciate, by the way, because it makes my job easier. But no, I mean, joking aside, like that's really amazing. So I guess ultimately, so you did this, or you're doing this DB summer internship now, and then you continue to recruit for your junior summer. Did you notice a difference in terms of like how many interviews you were able to get this time versus last time, or even like the conversion within those interviews in terms of advancing to the next round or getting the offer? Like, was there a noticeable difference?
Yeah, so I think for me, I mean, there was definitely a major difference, and just like with the number of super days I get, I mean, this time around, I would say like when I was applying to other banks, I kind of only applied to, I'm trying to remember, I'd say like applied to 5.
Okay.
I got super days at all. I got super days at 3 of them. And that for me was just a lot. That was a lot higher than I guess like when I'd been previously applying on my own, starting out when I was just getting like, I wasn't even getting like first round interviews at places. So yeah, it was definitely just a lot easier. And then even at the super days themselves, it was nice because everyone essentially, like I had enough of the finance credentials on my resume at that point, which was also that, something that was really nice.
Yeah. So you say you applied to 5 firms this time. Was there a reason why you were being so selective? Is it just like, hey, I'm already at DB, I can always go back to DB, and I really like my group there, and so I can be very picky about where I apply, or what was the rationale there?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, I really like DB. I mean, I know like they're not necessarily like the top, bulge bracket firm out there, but one thing that I really liked about the firm is just that they do have a lot of connections to Europe, and I love London. Spent a few months there, and so that was something that I really liked. Also, I kind of going into it, I really wanted to just first sort of experience, what the group was like. And also just like in my particular group, leverage finance, I kind of wanted to get a better feel of what leverage finance and what being in a product group was like, just so that I could make just a more informed decision, because not every bank has, product groups. And it's, again, it varies a lot firm by firm. So I just kind of wanted to just essentially get more information.
Yeah, got it. And so of the 5 firms that you applied to, they were like all bulge bracket banks or like
Yeah,
bulge bracket? Okay. So you applied
yeah.
to like the typical bulge bracket banks out there. And you got to 3 super days. And then in the end, well, I know one of them you felt went quite well, but somehow just didn't work out. And we still haven't figured out
Yeah.
why.
Well,
Right.
they were actually my backup plan. So I had a super day. It was Bank of America, Goldman, and JP. Got the offer for Goldman, but well, JP, I ended up turning that one down just because after I got Goldman, I was like, yeah, I'm okay. But
Got it. So you
yeah,
didn't
with
have to
Bank of
go to
America,
the JP Morgan Super Day because that one is,
yeah, no,
yeah. Okay.
yeah,
That makes sense. Yeah, and then Bank of America, you felt like went really well, but somehow you weren't rejected. You were just on hold, right?
yeah.
Like,
I was basically waitlisted. I mean, like looking back now, I can kind of see why. I got the offer for the super day like less than a day before the super day was scheduled, and I was also doing stuff for DB at the time, and
yeah,
so I had just like it was kind of a major time crunch. And at that point, it was kind of nice because I already like pretty much most of the technicals I already had a decent understanding. It was just a matter of like going through videos, kind of like brushing up on things
yeah,
relatively quickly. I think just yeah, during the interview though, I mean, Bank of America was definitely like not like I would have preferred Goldman or JP over Bank of America, and I think that maybe somehow maybe came through a little bit in the interview, which
right,
is sort of my hunch.
right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, and I remember after B of A and before your Goldman interview, we decided to kind of just do a quick mock on some of your
Mhm.
behaviorals just to make sure that nothing was off, right? Because typically, like when you feel like an interview goes really well and you don't get the desired outcome, we know it's not the technicals because you'll know if you mess up on the technicals. So then usually we'll hone in on the behaviorals, right?
Mhm.
And like honestly, even on the behaviorals when we did the mock, like you were pretty good. It wasn't like there wasn't anything major in terms of red flags, but it's like the feedback we were giving you, I would say, I don't know if you agree, but I would say they're like very small, nuanced things, which to be honest, a lot of times, like the difference between getting an offer versus not getting offer, it's really that marginal difference, right? Because it's like if you're making it to the super day, it's not like you're a crappy candidate, right? And everyone else that you're competing against is not like they're total scrubs, right? It's like
Yeah.
usually it's the small things that can get you dinged or can really set you apart. But because it's the small little marginal things, that's where it's like it's really hard sometimes to identify what you're not doing correctly, right?
Right.
This is why, like, whenever people are like, oh, I can just do it on my own, like, what's the big deal or what's the big difference? Well, the big deal is, like you said at the beginning of this, is like when you hear that Goldman Sachs only has an acceptance rate of 1% or 2%, your margin for error is like almost non-existent, right?
Yeah.
And so not saying that, hey, you have to become like this totally different person, but like if we can even just make small improvements
Mhm.
to your story, or to maybe it's the same story but the way you deliver it, or just
Mhm.
removing a small piece from it or adding a small piece back in, or whatever it might be, that could
Mhm.
end up making a difference, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think also for Bank of America, something that you really honed in on on our mock interview was just sort of working on like the YGS question. And I think when I did B of A, that was something I definitely did not do enough research on my own end, and I also just did not necessarily have necessarily the best answer for that. And I think for them that just and also just like those small little details, and especially when you have other things going on in your life. You are working like at an actual banking internship, and you're just you're busy, you're stressed. Really honing in on those like small little nuanced details is really, really important, because chances are, you're maybe not necessarily in like maybe not in the best mood, right? To, actually go into that interview. And so having kind of that focus on just those minute details is really important, because chances are those are gonna make a really big difference.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what group are you going to be going to at Goldman?
TMT,
Got it. So the group
very
that
excited.
the group that everyone wants to go to on Wall Street Oasis.
Yep.
Like honestly, it's unfortunate. I mean, not for you, but it's unfortunate from my point of view that I mean, look, I used to browse Wall Street Oasis all the time when I was in college, and back then they were only like 1 or 2 years old. But even back going all the way back then, they just always had this culture where everyone on there makes you feel like unless you go to Goldman TMT or MS M&A, then everything else is a crappy bank or something like that, right? Or like unless you go to Goldman TMT, you can forget about private equity, right? Or like that's what everyone makes it seem like, which is not really the case, but regardless, and so I mean, I just want to say that for people who are listening, it's like, look, not everyone's going to get into Goldman TMT. If you don't, it's okay. But obviously, if you can't get in, that's an amazing outcome because there's a reason why everyone talks about them. Like they do work on all the biggest, highest profile, most exciting, coolest tech deals out there. And I used to work at Morgan Stanley Tech, and we would go up against GSTMT all the time. So I know how good the GS team is. And they definitely maintained their track record of excellence over the years, right? So that's amazing. That's an amazing outcome. I mean, going from someone who started relatively late sophomore year and was intimidated about how hard it is to get into banking to fast forward just a little bit over a year now, you're sitting here, you're going to one of the best groups on Wall Street, and you have all of your success ahead of you. Like that's super exciting. So I'm super happy for you, and obviously super well deserved because you put in the work and just really made it happen, right? So I guess like one last question for you, uh, if we can, or if you can maybe leave people with just one piece of advice, just on the recruiting process in general, or it could be like a piece of advice that maybe you wish someone else had given you back when you first started this process. Like, what would you want to tell people?
Um, I guess I would say something along the lines of, feeling intimidated it's normal. It's banking, it's competitive, it's hard, but with a program like Wall Street Mastermind, you're in a really good situation. Like you will get a really good outcome regardless.
If you do the work.
Yes, if you do the work. Yes.
I always have to caveat that because sometimes people think like, oh, if we just join Wall Street Mastermind, they have an over 90% success rate, that means that I'm going to be guaranteed a job. It's like, no, 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 no. Like nothing is guaranteed. We're not doing anything illegal here. This is not the college admission scandal or something like that. Like, nothing will be handed to you, but like if you do, it's just like sports. It's like strength training. Like it says, like you have a coach, but you got to put in the work and you got to put in the reps. If you don't go to the gym and
Yeah.
you don't practice, if you don't eat right, you don't get the sleep that you're supposed to get, like then you're not going to get the results, right?
Yeah.
But as a
Exactly.
coach, we're just here to help you get the results faster because the timeline is so compressed nowadays, and we're here to help you get better results in that same amount of time, right? Like if you can go
Right.
from not getting to banking at all or not getting interviews and not getting offers at all to getting in, that's a huge difference. But sometimes depending on how qualified you are, like maybe you could have already gotten into banking on your own, right? And I'm not saying you couldn't have, Selin, like maybe you could have, but maybe it wouldn't have been Goldman TMT, right? And so that is also an incremental improvement that's very much, I mean, it's a difference maker, right?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, and I guess like maybe another piece of advice too is just, I mean, as you were saying, like do the work and just continue to stay on top of it. Like even when I got my offer from DB, I was still like going back to your videos and just kind of constantly learning and trying to, just always trying to grow.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the work doesn't really stop until you have like that ultimate outcome that you want, which to me, I mean, not saying it has to be Goldman TMT, but just like you have that offer that makes you say, okay, I'm 100% satisfied and I don't need to keep going, right? Like, okay, I'm going to turn down the JP Morgan interview or whatever. Like when you get to that point, then you can stop, relax, enjoy college, whatever, summer, whatever it is that you guys do nowadays. But no, that's great advice. So, guys, for those of you that are still listening, if all of this makes sense to you, maybe you started a little bit late, maybe you've been using some of the resources you have at school, but it feels not super cohesive, or you're still feeling a little bit lost, and you want something that's more structured, more organized. You want coaches who are more experienced, or maybe you just want the best outcome possible, right? Like, you're the type of person who's willing to put in the work, but for the same amount of work that you're going to put in, you just want to get the best results. Then I want to encourage you guys to book a free strategy session with us. This is that same call that Selin had with Jen that she mentioned earlier, where on these calls we just try to learn a bit more about you, right? Find out where you're at in the recruiting process. What are your goals? What kind of banks you want to get into? And then also, what are you struggling with, right? Maybe you're struggling with technicals, or maybe you're struggling with behaviorals, or maybe you can't even get interviews in the first place, right? Or you don't know how to network. Like, everyone has a different challenge, which is why it's kind of hard to do like this one size fits all thing, right? Like, where that, at least that's not how we do things. So we try to get to know every single one of you, and then based on that, we'll try to prescribe whatever we think makes sense for you. And we'll come up with a customized game plan that we think will work for you. Or if we don't think that we have something that we're very confident about, at a minimum, we'll tell you that, and we'll give you some advice on what we think you should do instead. Like, the answer may not be for you to work with us, because we can't work with everybody. But either way, we'll give you some advice on just what we think you should do, and you can take that and implement it on your own, and hopefully still get a better outcome, right? So if that's something that you're interested in, you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's www.wallstmastermind.com/apply. And pick a time that works for you. We'll hop on with you for 30, 45 minutes and talk about your situation. And we can take it from there. All right. So with that said, Selin, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to everyone today, share your experiences, and also your insight and just a little bit of advice on the recruiting process as a whole. Again, huge congrats on getting into a firm like Goldman TMT. Obviously, anytime any one of our students get such a phenomenal outcome, we're happy. It makes us look good, even though you deserve most of the credit, but we'll try to take a little bit. So thanks for letting us come along for the ride, and it was really fun working with you. And I know we'll continue to work together going forwards as well. But yeah, it was just can't wait to see all the success that you have.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. So that'll be it for this episode. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys again in the near future. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.